Hi, I'm Gary Young.
And I'm Carys.
Every week, Carys and I will be talking about those stories in the news that are overreported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not talked about enough.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar.
So, Carys, how's your week been?
Yeah, all right. We're recording this day early, so it's my whole rhythm's been thrown off. Went to a festival on the weekend, hosted by grime artist Skepta in Crystal Palace, Big Smoke, and they showed the football. So, watched England take and score 5 penalties with thousands of people. When the penalties were being taken, it was like, if we miss and crash out, it's not going to be the best vibe for live music. You know, it was like it was a gamble.
I watched it at it was at my daughter's school fete. They extended the fete time so that we could watch it on the telly. But my daughter's school is being closed. This fete was a kind of farewell fete to the school. And this was the last thing that was going to be in this fete. And it had been great and the vibes had been really good. You know, and if they'd lost, it would have been too symbolic, too emblematic. There was no...
Yeah, again, another big call, another big gamble putting it on.
It was a big gamble. Particularly, you know, when you put on that game in a big public place when England are playing, you're flipping many coins, you know. I recommend to everyone listening to go back and listen to our conversation with Huda.
Yes, Huda Jawad.
From the Three Hijabis, where we talk about the intersection of football and identity, race, nationalism. Because honestly, there would have been a time, I think, when the cohort of kids at the school that my daughter's at, a lot of them wouldn't have felt it. Wouldn't have felt it for England. It would have felt almost like something either hostile or alien, and we're not there now.
There's something about Gareth Southgate's England that we can all get behind. And there was a really beautiful redemptive arc for Bukayo Saka, who missed a penalty in the last Euros and obviously suffered horrific abuse, to then score a goal and score his penalty. And I thought his press conference afterwards, he's just such a lovely, level-headed boy, Gary. He's a wonderful, lovely boy, and I'm so proud of him every day, as if I were his mother. And just for everyone, we're recording this before the semi-finals, so either you're listening to this and England are going to be in the finals on Sunday, or we've crashed out and something bad's happened to Bukayo. So as we record this, you know, we're feeling jubilant, we're feeling buoyant.
We've now got Diane Abbott as mother of the house and Bukayo as child of the nation.
Correct. We should talk about Auntie Diane. And her triumphant return to Parliament.
Yes, I know. Big fuck you to the establishment. She's not supposed to be there. That was not the plan.
It was the slight dissonance of Keir giving her a shout out. And it's like, do you know what? I guess that's politics and that's Parliament. But it was like that weird kind of fake Mean Girls thing where it's like, you literally didn't want her to be here, or someone in your team didn't. But now you're like, special shout out to Diane. So glad you're here as mother of the house.
Yeah.
But I've actually, do you know what? Over the weekend, I was actually feeling pretty upbeat. We don't have a corrupt, awful Tory government. The Labour government have come in, they've hit the ground running, they're doing deals with the doctors. England managed to score 5 penalties. Things are looking up.
They did stop doing some bad things. I just don't believe them. But they stopped.
I think we're in slightly different spots on this. I'm like the woman whose like partner has cheated, but I'm like, he said he's changed. He's going to change, going to therapy. I feel good about it. And you're just like, once a cheater, always a cheater.
Yeah. So they stopped the flights to Rwanda. They didn't divert them to Tuscany, as I thought they might. It seems that they're not going to get in the way of the ICC issuing that arrest warrant for Netanyahu, which are two bad things that they're not doing.
It's kind of also on us now. We've got a vaguely progressive government with a huge majority and a window to act pretty much unimpeded. So what are we going to get them to do?
Yeah, I'm going to describe it differently. We have a not Tory government is what we have. I don't consider them vaguely progressive. This is a strand that's going to continue for a little while until, between me and you, until either they do something that I kind of can't deny is really good, or they start cheating again. And it's like, is that Tory perfume I can smell? Where you been?
Come on, Labour, prove Gary wrong. Prove Gary wrong and me right. Live up to my hopes.
You check Keir's phone like while he's asleep, do the facial recognition and see that he's been flirting with some Tories.
So my over the top for this week is the French election result. And sort of colon, Macron is a wanker. Or Macron?
Start hard.
Macron is a wanker.
Right, okay. Yeah. I think if you're following with wanker, then the pronunciation really just sort of stops mattering after a while.
Yeah, you're right. That bloke that runs France is a real dickhead. Okay, so stay with me. Obviously, alongside England's dramatic triumph in the football, we saw, and I'm sure many of our listeners watched the split screen of the far right and the left reacting to the exit poll.
Yeah, that was awesome.
It was a clear win for the left, which we have to feel good about, on high turnout, on like decades high turnout. And when the votes were still sort of piling in and the news channels were like, it's a record turnout, there was the part of my brain that was like, oh Lord, the French fascists have turned out in record numbers. So it was wonderful. It felt great. I think all the activists who organised and all the people who turned out should rightly feel happy and proud. Macron was not a strategic genius with this. He is very self-centred. He cares about himself and his own power. And he rolled the dice on letting fascists run parliament. He didn't see the left-wing coalition coming. So for those not following closely, all of France's left-wing parties, from the Greens to the Socialists to Mélenchon's party, united to form a left bloc, and that bloc has the highest number of seats in parliament. Not enough to have a majority on their own, but most French people voted for an unambiguously left candidate. Macron didn't see that coming. What he thought he was going to do was be like, me or Le Pen, what do you want? And that wearing some of the clothes of the French right, passing horrible immigration bills, having sketchy politics, and then sort of hoping that you can play this game of like, well, you don't like me or my party, but I'm better than the actual fascist. And I think people are still being like, he's a strategic genius.
Oh,
and he's not a strategic genius.
No,
he's a chancer.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm going to use relationship analogies with all these politicians. I'm not dating any politicians, but it's like you make up after the argument. And then you're like, you feel all of the relief. And it's like, but who fucking started the argument? Like all the adrenaline coursing through everyone's body. And then it's like, oh, the relief. But did this need to happen? Was this necessary? I have a few friends and former colleagues who live in France. They all happen to not be white.
No one happens not to be white, Carys. It's a gift from God.
It's true. It's a gift from God. Most of them are French Algerian. I don't know if they would all identify as French Algerian, but like they are people who are on the front lines of French politics. If people are Islamophobic, they are the ones who get harassed on the streets. When racist immigration bills get passed, and they are the ones who had to come out onto the streets and organize for candidates, not Macron. It remains to be seen what this victory for the left will mean in parliamentary terms. And I have a sneaking feeling that Mélenchon, who's the kind of, it's obviously reductive to do this, but I'm going to do it because my friend who is French did it too, who's sort of a French Corbyn, is going to get peeled off from that coalition. Most mainstream coverage is already like the controversial Mélenchon. One of my friends that I spoke to about this, he was like, he's pretty much the only politician that challenges Islamophobia and racism and talks about the French state as like producing and manufacturing it to divide working class white and working class people of color. And that was not always Mélenchon's politics. He's been on a journey, as they say. So if he and his party get peeled away and the socialist or the Greens lumped together with Macron, then is it a victory, or are the left just propping up this centrist dickhead? There's also the people that Macron surrounds himself with, his spin doctors and advisors, but also there's this group apparently who are quite instrumental in the surprise election of people who have these like semi-official roles. So there's a guy called Bruno Roger Petit, Thierry Solène. I think he doesn't have a job anymore, but the kind of former News Corp lobbyist, Frédéric Michel. And a lot of these people have ties to the far right or to highly problematic French business interests in African countries. There was a recent, like in the last couple of days, revelation that one of these men was having dinner parties with Le Pen and people from National Rally. There's a lot of digging into and kind of poking at Mélenchon on the left and calling them controversial. But I actually think Macron is quite controversial.
My takeaway from the French elections was, why couldn't we do that? Why couldn't we imagine if there had been, I mean, one of the reasons is we don't have PR and we don't have 2 rounds of voting. And that would have made a big difference. I would love for the strand of politics that represented the Greens, the Independents, to say, okay, election, we're different. We've got different politics, different red lines. But in this area, you stand. And we'll support you. And that had there been one left candidate, and I'm talking left of Labour, there's a whole load of space there, those results would have felt different. We are hampered by the first past the post, but we are also hampered, I think, by a kind of sectarian politics. So I'm hoping that in the politics in between the elections, there is more of a sort of pooling of the energy.
Yeah, and I mean, I could make a joke about the left being divided, but I think the big issue still is that I know, there are some people, some in my family, just don't believe the Labour Party is left wing anymore. And so they can't see a coalition or a political project that includes people who are in the Labour Party. That isn't my position. And I'm sure there are some French people who like the Socialist Party isn't left enough, but they were able to form a bloc and form a electorally incredibly effective bloc, and hopefully they're going to keep that energy.
For my over the top, I want to talk about Joe Biden's age. Joe Biden's 81. He's the president of the United States, if anyone missed that. He had a very poor debate performance a few weeks back. Lots of people are demanding that he step out because they say he's too old, which I want to come back to. He's polling kind of below Trump. There is an issue with the money that has been donated so far. It's donated to him and Kamala Harris. So if he drops out, they can't spend it. So it's about 200 million, I think, that they can't spend. So there's a real problem. I want to make 3 main points. The first is, it's not his age, it's his capacity. We have to be very clear about the distinction, because otherwise it gets kind of ugly and ageist. And, well, at what age can someone stand? And at what age, do you just take people out the back and just kind of get rid of them? The second is that there is an obvious successor, which is Kamala Harris. She is polling as well or better than him against Trump. She's got higher favorability ratings. Kamala Harris her dad is Jamaican and her mum is Indian. So the second black person to reach high office, neither of them African-American as such, neither of them descendants of slaves in America. Her Jamaican father would have been descendant of slaves in Jamaica. Somehow people stopped talking about her. Is there a clear reason? Is there an obvious reason why she is not being presented as the most obvious alternative? Not least because if she is chosen, they get to keep the money. But that's not the only reason. I think it's weird. And I don't fully understand it. I'm up for it if she's done something bad, if she's not that good. I think what's important is to beat Trump. And my worry is that Biden won't beat Trump because that perception is out there because of his capacity. My third is, for the love of God, come up with a plan. The Democrats are trashing the leader who is insisting that he is going to stand. Someone, please, in America, come up with a strategy, because you got the bombs, you got the economy, you're going to hand those over to Trump because someone's being stubborn. Is doing my head in. And I can't understand why Kamala Harris, whose politics I don't share, it's not like I think that would be great. She's not Bernie. She's no even Elizabeth Warren. But we are where we are. She's the most obvious contender.
Oh.
And yet somehow it doesn't seem obvious.
There is some ageism that happens, and you're right, it's not age, it's capacity. And it's funny, so I'm half Ghanaian, and African political leaders, they're we're running on into 70s, 80s, 90s, especially a lot of that first generation of independence leaders like your Kenyatas, your Mugabes, like they went from leading anti-imperial struggles to leading countries. I'm not advocating for them all. Some of them are right. But like, it is a very culturally specific conversation and it is quite an ageist conversation. I don't think it's a secret why Kamala Harris hasn't been touted. I think it's because she's a woman and she's a woman of color. I do think that the polling that shows that she could beat Trump is recent. And like, historically, she has polled badly with, I guess, the MAGA voters or the switcher voters. But yeah, it's a funny one. I always think of the Democratic Party as much more ruthless and effective, partly because they got more money than us. So it has been a bit weird to see them spin out like this.
There's something quite important that I want to take issue with, but I do want to interrogate, which is, of course, Kamala Harris, being a woman of color, is going to face sterner criticism, a harsher lens, and so on. There's a great quote from Du Bois where he says, "We've had our bad side emphasized for so long that we've forgotten we even had a bad side." And I do wonder, is that the reason? Is that the reason? There's a bunch of people that I know and respect in America who would be up for the symbolic candidacy, and somehow they're not up for her. They're not, I mean, they'll vote for her against Trump, but they're not enthusiastic about her. Bearing in mind that vice presidency is a very difficult kind of role to fill. I didn't hear much about her for the last 4 years, one way or the other. Her race and agenda is always going to be in play. I'm not sure that's all there is.
I mean, what we're really saying is the Americans need to learn from the French.
But this was predictable, though. It was predictable. So she could have been groomed.
It was predictable for everyone but Biden and the people around Biden, right? And I think it's easy to forget how there's a level of delusion required to be a politician and a level of self-belief. And that, I don't think, creates leaders that are willing to step aside. And I could go further and make generalizations about men, but I won't.
You kind of just did.
I think we see it. Yeah, it was implied. It was a low blow, and I apologize. I apologize, men. Sorry, Gary. Sorry, men.
Never apologize to men.
We had it with Ken Livingstone, right? He stood one more time than he should have, and Boris won. My opinion. I just think the thing that makes you want to lead a country or represent a constituency or a state, I just think there's like a little bit of like arrogance and self-belief that you probably need to put your face on a leaflet, but then means you're not very good at knowing when the party's over.
Coming back to your point about Macron, this is someone saying, you know, you're going to have to throw the dice on me, but against Trump. There's no cavalry coming over the hill with Mélenchon. This is you or Trump.
So my under the radar is Suella Braverman. Have you been following her, Gary, since our national election?
It will be a cold day in hell before I don't follow Suella Braverman.
Yeah, you got to watch her, man. First thing to say is Suella's been busy. My girl wrote a column in the Telegraph, I think before maybe even the election had happened. She'd been pointing fingers at Rishi from time. She is, in the internet parlance, she's messy. She's been out and about and she's doing a lot, but there was one speech in particular. So she did, in the last couple of days, she did 2 hilariously named conferences, NatCon and PopCon.
Just con.
So she was in Washington for NatCon. There's some clips went online, and then she spoke at PopCon, which is Liz Truss's thing, but she did it via video link because she was in America with the NatCon people. So Kemi Badenoch said she's having a very public breakdown. I actually read every single line of Suella Braverman's speech at NatCon, and it's pretty unhinged, but it is also someone on, I don't know what bit of the right. I don't think we've had a moderate or left-wing Tory for a while. Like Rishi Sunak was not of the left of the Tory party. He was a Brexiteer. But like her sort of ERG right part of the Tory party, that speech is like a masterclass in the narrative that they are now going to spin. So the first thing that you identified is the problem with the recent Conservative government was it was full of liberals, Gary.
Yeah,
for liberals.
No, I
it wasn't even a
that.
right-wing government.
I said that.
Wall-to-wall liberals. So liberals is the main issue.
Communists.
She doesn't define liberals. And then there were some great sound bites. Most of the speech isn't that good. I wouldn't read all of it. But like the lunatic woke virus that is working its way through the British state. Again, a bit of a like callback. Like it's a similar thing to what Liz Truss did. So basically they're telling the story of the last few years. And I mean, the story's a lie. The levels of like delusion and twisting the truth are, I think, worth engaging with, because even if she isn't going to be the next Tory leader, which is what is currently being briefed to the lobby, she's gone too far. She's too friendly with Farage. She was a kingmaker in the last leadership contest. So she's a politically significant figure, whether we like it or not. And her politics are terrifying. The thing in particular that she said in this NatCon speech that I think is really scary was about the progress flag, so the LGBTQ plus flag. But the line that I think has made its way out, but I think has really been underreported, is the progress flag flew over our buildings as if they were occupied territory. She goes on to call the pride flag, the progress flag, a horrible political campaign, and said, it says one monstrous thing to me, that I was a member of a government that presided over the mutilation of children. Other highlights and lowlights of the speech were her talking about Nigel Farage and how you have to admire his courage, praising numerous Trump staffers, talking about how the moment she knew Trump would be president, she is allying herself with the far right. She's speaking at their expensive conferences. And she is taking the baton over the line of something we've been seeing brewing for years now, which is she is in bed with conservative right-wing groups that are trying to roll back LGBTQ rights. And suddenly government departments can't fly the pride flag anymore. And these liberal conservatives that were running the government for the last few years were all complicit. She said that it was a cosplay of right-wingery and the reality was socialism-like.
So there was, YouGov did a poll. Kemi Badenoch is kind of by quite a long way the favourite among Tory grassroots to be the next leader. She's got twice the support of Suella Braverman. Badenoch's got 31% of the vote. There's no one running away with this. It's going to be a hellscape. This is a row in which Kemi Badenoch looks sane. It's not like the opposition to Braverman is saying is coming from some liberal outpost. James Cleverly is also saying, look, calm it down, calm down. James Cleverly is saner than those two, but more importantly, Kemi. But this is not a couple of reasonable people having an argument. This is two quite kind of unhinged people fighting over a straitjacket.
I think the thing that worries me is less who wins, but we've seen the way that the Tory party contorts itself around these like ERG, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Liz Truss, Suella Braverman figures. You don't have to win the leadership to shape the Tory party. And I'm not particularly invested in the future of the Tory party. I wish it didn't exist. She and Liz Truss have set out the stall for the argument they're going to prosecute. And like, it sounds bananas to me, but I mean, the other thing she said in the speech was, we didn't talk enough about immigration. So like, she, with a straight face, with chest, said that we had out of control population growth. And what we didn't particularly do was mention immigration. Like, you know, you're just like, am I high? Reading that speech was genuinely like, have I accidentally taken a hallucinogenic drug? And also, she said, people said the Tories were divided. That's why we lost. There was far too little audible division. It was like, you were knifing my man when you were in the cabinet. You were chatting shit about the police when you were Home Secretary. What do you mean there wasn't enough division? She's a fantasist, but she is a fantasist with power within the Conservative Party. And she's someone who is being, along with Jacob Rees-Mogg, being very explicit that they need to win back Reform voters and they need to engage with Reform voters. We need to pay attention to her.
I agree. That YouGov poll showed that half of the Tory party grassroots wanted to merge with Reform. And then if you couple that with Tony Blair saying, yeah, what Labour's got to do, priority, not nationalise the British Rail, not sort out the water, shitty water, not compensate the Windrush victims. Labour's got to focus on immigration and this woke stuff. It's like, Jesus, man. My point there is that Labour could, as you mentioned earlier on, could, should, might be looking over its left shoulder to some extent. But I don't think there's any guarantee that they're not going to be constantly looking over their right shoulder and thinking, well, we have to outsmart these gits. I don't trust the Labour Party not to follow the Tories down these rabbit holes.
And also, like, what she's doing is kite flying. I spend too much time thinking about Suella Braverman, but like if we go back to the homelessness as a lifestyle choice, or the people marching against genocide in Gaza are hate marchers, like she literally managed to gen up the far right to go and protect the cenotaph that wasn't under threat by anyone demonstrating against what was happening in Gaza. She can seem ridiculous, but this idea of political kite flying like a test balloon to see how people respond is part of a bigger political strategy. And like, if there's anyone that is talking to each other and unifying and working across borders, it is the right and the far right. And, you can Google all of this stuff. You can look at the Heritage Foundation. You can look at groups like Citizen Go that are like extreme Christians in Europe and in the US, who often fund disinformation campaigns in Africa. Kenya's a country where Citizen Go have paid for a lot of political disinformation. So like these groups are all talking to each other and like building up these narratives where there's this deep state of environmentalists and trans activists, I believe was Liz Truss's turn of phrase when she was on her American speaking tour, who were blocking the champions of freedom and low taxes and progress. Yeah, I just think it's scary because it's part of a pretty concerted effort to manufacture rolling back the things that we have, the rights and the freedoms that we have secured, and that saying that government buildings shouldn't fly the progress flag, that's kite flying. That's testing. How does that land?
And you know me, Carys, I'm not big on the politics of representation for a range of reasons. Suella Braverman, Kemi Badnoch, Priti Patel, Rishi Sunak would be 4 of those reasons, but there are many more in terms of like skin folk aren't kinfolk, diversity, when, as in the words of Angela Davis, can be the difference that brings no difference and the change that makes no change. Having different coloured hands on the machinery of power is no use if the machine is still working the same way. All of that. And there are a few points I want to make about this parliament and a few lessons that we can learn from this parliament when it comes to diversity. So there are 90 people of colour have been elected in this parliament. It's the most there's ever been. That's 13.8% of parliament. Non-white people are 14% of the country. We're pretty much at parity, which, given that in 1983, 40 years ago, there were none, significant advance. Labour have 66 non-white people, Tories have 15, Lib Dems have 5, and there are 4 non-white independents. That's up from the 65 that there were in the 2019 parliament. With the previous Tory government, particularly when Sunak won, or even when Liz Truss won, and it was Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, and there were no white men in the top 4 jobs, and when Rishi Sunak, and there was a lot of carry on, as much from Liberals as anywhere else, of, we've really got to take this on board. Look what the Tories are doing. And, people say the Tories are racist, but, it was like the Fast Show. Like, suits you, sir. But that it's always the case that there are more people of colour in Labour than there are in Tories. Even though they have fewer, the few that they have do better. My rationale for why this would be is that right-wing people of colour travel lighter. This is a perfectly reasonable ideological thing. They're not taking anybody else with them. They don't want to. They say, look, it's got nothing to do with my race. My race is irrelevant. Of course, when it needs to be relevant, it becomes relevant. Here's the thing. Being black, or Asian, being a person of colour in this country is a full-time job. And the wages are low and the hours are long. And when you get the feedback, it's often not great. But you don't get to come in and out of it at your choice, at your whim. They travel light. Whereas when you elect Diane Abbott, you are electing the interests of a group of people. She stands as a kind of tribune of a group of people. She stands for the perceived interests. One could say she's wrong or right, but for the perceived interests of black people. Black people on the left, generally because of their politics, they stand with some kind of collective notion in mind. And so they take more people with them, but they travel less far because those demands are demands of communities that are among the poorest, the most marginalized, and so it takes longer to get into the mainstream. None of this stuff fell out of the sky. Right? Black sections, which I was involved in as a kind of nipper, really, when I was a student.
Do you want to tell me what black sections are?
Yeah, the Labour Party black sections was a group of people, and they said, look, you've got women's sections of the Labour Party. You've got I think there was Polis Ion, which was a Jewish section of the Labour Party. I think that was what it was called. We want a black section of the Labour Party, that we are members of the Labour Party, but we have specific experiences and interests. And black was politically black at the time, non-white. The venom that attracted from the Kinnock leadership and others was incredible. And they fought it tooth and nail. And it was a demand that came from the left. But it was a demand that produced the first 4 black MPs who were all in black sections: Keith Vaz, Paul Boateng, Diane Abbott, and Bernie Grant. Similarly, women in Parliament. In 1992, there were 60 women in Parliament. In 1997, there were 120. Why? Because women organised and they said this is not acceptable. And there were all women shortlists. They made Labour say in half of the winnable seats, it will only be all women shortlists.
For people who aren't familiar with Labour Party machinations, every time someone is selected to be the Labour candidate in a constituency, there's like a local contest, and in the Labour Party, it's vaguely democratic. So if you live in Hackney North and Stoke Newington, you get to vote for who the candidate is. And all women shortlists say the only candidates on offer will be women.
I mean, that's not how Diane Abbott got in.
Not how many women get in, but it did boost the numbers of women significantly.
Yeah, so a few men said, oh, this is unfair because men have it so hard, and they took it to court. But by that time, large numbers of women had already been selected. That's where the 120 women came from. So that these numbers, it's not a product of our national genius. It's not like time and tide will sort this out. They came because people fought for it. And to the extent that it's now a banal kind of fact of life that there will be a significant number of women in Parliament, and I think there's more women than ever before.
We're at 40%.
Yeah. Whereas in 1992, it was about 10%, or just below 10%. And I think I heard Harriet Harman say when she joined, it was like 3% or something. These things happen because you make them happen. I don't hang my hat on what that is necessarily going to mean for black people and women, but I think it is a point that is not sufficiently well made.
Well, I like this because I feel like we started with you pessimistic and me optimistic, and we're ending with you with lots of Gary optimism, which we like to hear. Yeah, I think it's a good under. I'm glad you talked about women as well as people of colour. And I think, Labour abandoned all women shortlists officially in 2022, but we didn't get to where we've got to now. And make no mistake, most of the female MPs are Labour MPs, which is a bit circular because Labour won the election, but generally there are more women MPs in the Labour Party than other parties. Like, it is the product of organising of all women shortlists, of organisations like the Labour Women's Network, which are really focused on getting women selected as council candidates, as parliamentary candidates, and do really good work. Yeah, I think it's something worth holding on to. This stuff doesn't naturally organically happen. Most of the time it's uphill to get selected if you're not a straight white man, which is just statistically true, although you often get pushback on it. The thing I want to add is that I think there is something about the political culture of the Tory party versus the Labour Party that makes it easier for non-traditional traditional or non-white people, I guess for insurgent candidates to become leaders and to be in positions of power. I think that, and this is much less about Tory politics and Labour politics, but much more the cultures of the party. I think the Tory party is pretty explicitly a political party that wants to govern Britain and believes it is the natural party of government in Britain. It is also a right-wing party. It also has an ideology, but fundamentally they're like, we should be in charge and we will be in charge and we're ruthless enough to do what it takes to be in charge. I think the Labour Party is like really culturally conservative. And I think that is one of the reasons why it's been so uphill, despite it being like the left party or the party of social justice, to get to this point of representation. I think that to do well in Labour, you have to be well connected with other Labour activists. You probably need to be active in the trade union movement. I think it's very hard for like an outsider or an insurgent person who hasn't been, to be honest, involved in the Labour Party since they were a student to get a position of power or to get selected. I think we do travel less light if we are people of colour on the left. I don't know when Labour is going to produce a female prime minister or a non-white prime minister. At current rate of progress, not soon.
No. So there we have it. That was Over the Top and Under the Radar.
Yeah, and just to remind you, if you do like what we do and you want to support us, you can sign up to be a Patreon supporter. So go to Patreon's website and put in Over the Top, Under the Radar. We have a new package, the Prosecco Socialist package, if you want to give a little bit more money every month, and there are different packages. So if you like what we're doing and you want us to keep going, please support us on Patreon.
Yeah, please put your money where your ears are, if you can. In the words of Karl Marx, from each according to his ability, to each according to their need. If you have the ability to give, then, you know, be a good lefty and chip in. And if you're a right-wing person who's hate listening, give us some money and we will continue to say the things that irritate you profoundly.
Thank you so much for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Make sure you sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com and connect with us on socials at over_under_pod_.